Are you looking for ideas for using your October 2022 Spellbinders card kit of the month? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I have the October 2022 Spellbinders card kit of the month called Oh What Fun, and thank you to Spellbinders for sending me this card kit. I am going to be picking paper busting templates from JessCrafts.com that I have designed to use 6x6 papers without making any scraps. And that means that you can use this regardless of whether you have this particular kit, a past kit, or just a 6x6 pattern paper pad. Although the Spellbinders card kits are a really good deal. You can probably make hundreds of cards with a single kit just because there's so much pattern paper, embellishments, etc. included. And I have shared some kit videos in the past, so if you want to get an idea of like what would be contained in the kit, there are videos on my channel about that, and also you can head to the Spellbinders website to see what is in the kit of the month. So I picked paper busting templates, as I said, and the ones I picked today, each of them takes one piece of 6x6 paper and makes two A2 size cards without any pattern paper scraps. It tells you specifically how to cut each sheet of 6x6 paper, and then it shows you a sketch for how to assemble each 6x6 paper, as well as a mat size. So if you like to use mats around your pattern paper, which I generally do, then it will tell you what size to cut those mats to as well. So it's all prescribed for you. They're downloadable PDFs, jesscrafts.com/resources. I take my template and the pattern papers that I picked, and that's where I always start is with the pattern paper. And I'm going to put it in these poly envelopes. They're 8.5 by 11. I like them because they fit my templates and then they fit everything else that I need. But also, I have found many other ways to use them in my craft room when I'm working on a project. Like these, I can put everything in it, but even other kinds of projects, and they do fit bulkier items in them, but yet they have some structure to it. So I find my papers and cardstock doesn't really get bent in it the way it might in some of the other zip top mesh bags that I've seen. Also, when I'm done with my card kits, and it is very popular for many card kits to come in those mesh bags, I take them out of the box that they come in for Spellbinders, which I actually do quite like, but it's a little bit bulkier, and I put them in these poly envelopes, and then they can expand and fit all the contents of the kit. Then when I have picked out all of my papers, I'm going to cut all of my papers. What's nice is that because Spellbinders paper is a little bit on the thinner side, you can actually cut multiple sheets at once really easily, so it's great when you want to make a lot of cards. And I find with like thicker pattern paper or cardstock, when you're trying to cut more than one sheet, sometimes, especially with a guillotine trimmer, you can get imprecise cuts because the thickness of the paper causes it to move. I like to go to my scraps when I am making my mats for my paper busting templates. In fact, I'm working on cutting all the pieces for template number 40 right now. And I didn't have a single sheet of full 8.5 by 11 paper left. I only had scraps, yet I was able to get all of the pieces that I needed for 4 full cards. And it doesn't work with every single sketch because some sketches have larger pieces, but there's a lot of my sketches and templates that have a lot of small pieces put together into an arrangement on a card, or don't even need that much in terms of mats, and so those can be great for using up those scraps. Let's take a look at each individual design. I picked 5 designs and I'm going to make 4 of each. I'm starting with paper busting template number 2. It calls for 2 large rectangles, and I mixed up the pattern paper because I like to use multiple patterns, but you don't have to do that. So for each of my cards or each of my sets, there are 2 sheets of pattern paper and 4 cards. When I assemble this particular sketch, I like to use some extra cardstock to sort of support the piece that's overhanging. So on that pink panel there, it overhangs the back panel onto the card, and by putting a little scrap cardstock there, which is another great use of your scrap cardstock, it just helps to keep everything a little bit more even and smooth. I try to use a variety of the provided embellishments in these videos so you can get an idea of like what the different choices are and how you might use each one. So I'm using the chipboard stickers for this first set. There are quite a few sentiments, and they also have some gold foil accents. In addition to the chipboard, though, I also do have an add-on. So Oh What Fun has an add-on that there's like a die cut add-on and then a die cut add-on that's like more sentiment focused. So if you feel like when you're working with these kits, you're getting a lot of cards, but you eventually run out of sentiments, of course you can stamp sentiments from the included kit. But I thought this was kind of a cool add-on, particularly for this month where you're making like holiday cards, because people tend to need to make a lot of those. So to not have to stamp all the sentiments is great. I'm just going to kind of go through and pick which chipboard pieces I think make sense. It's kind of easier to pick them for the pink background because it's less busy, and where the white background is a little bit more busy. And so you just want to keep those things in mind, is like maybe you're picking, if you have a more busy pattern paper, picking a more solid embellishment. I'm working on sketch number 40. I was using my cardstock scraps to cut the mats for the sketch, but even more than that, I wanted to cut some of the Christmas trees from the die set. And I was able to cut the Christmas tree out of the mat for one of these pieces of pattern paper, because once I put the pattern paper back on top of it, it's going to cover that hole. And so that can be a great way, especially if you're like working with the cardstock from the kit. There's a limited amount of it. There's only a few sheets. So if you can do little things like cutting out of the center or something you might use for a mat, you can extend your cardstock and get a little bit better of a deal, because cardstock can get pricey, especially the really nice stuff that die cuts beautifully. So this sketch calls for you to bump the rectangles, those long skinny strips, against the edge such in a way that the patterned paper lines up with the edge. But to make things easier, the sketch tells you exactly how to cut it so that you wouldn't have to cut off this extra cardstock, but you can just do a 1/4 inch mat all around and just cut off that extra cardstock. But make sure the way the sketch is designed is that your pattern paper should butt up against the edge of the card. If you don't do it that way, if you use like the whole mat, then you're just going to have a lot less white space on the edges, and the design is going to look a little less staggered. So I am in fact adding back that green cardstock that I cut out of the center of all of these pieces as our Christmas tree embellishments here. As I mentioned before, I like to kind of use a variety of the embellishments in the kit, but this time I was really drawn to the dies that were included. So there's a Santa set of dies and a Christmas tree set of dies. So I'm going to use both the Christmas trees and the Santa with one of my sets. So I wind up not using the stamp set at all. But the awesome thing is there's so much inspiration out there for these card kits, and even included in the card kit, that if you're not sure how to use one of the embellishments included, you will be able to find someone out there. Something that I have seen in the card kits this year from Spellbinders is they tend to include a metallic paper. So I've seen the gold and the silver, the mirrored cardstock included. Oh, I got someone on Etsy to like make a custom paperweight for me so that I could hold down my embellishments as I glue them. So I put Paper Buster on it because that is the hashtag that I'll use a lot when I'm sharing my paper busting templates, and because that's what I like to do. I am a paper buster because I work with my templates all the time. So there I was also showing you the little Christmas tree has like these swirls on it. Those are really tricky to weed out sometimes. So I like to pull the little bits out of the die cuts, and sometimes I just skip it, which I did this time for some of them, especially when you put that sticky stuff on the back. I am working with sketch number 34 next. This is another one that's super simple, but also has a pretty good use of cardstock scraps because it has two like really long strips. So they're not particularly like big wide strips, and so it's a size that is likely to be left over, and one you might want to try if you have a handful of cardstock scraps you're really trying to use up. And Then I'm going to embellish these ones with, I thought at first I would try these puffy words, but then these puffy words do wind up being another thing that I don't get to in this particular video. So I wanted to use them, but ultimately I decided not to for a number of reasons. And I think it's helpful to hear why you do and don't make design decisions. And so basically a lot of them, two of them would go on that ornament background, and it was really busy and I didn't think you would be able to read the words. And so then the other ones could go on that blue background, which would be much more readable. However, a lot of those sentiments were more than one word, and each of these strips along the bottom here only really accommodated one word because of its size. So that's kind of just a little insight into like why I make decisions, because I've learned as a new crafter, like hearing designers' decisions really helped me to better understand like what made sense to go together and why they would or would not do something. I decided to use the die cuts instead, and in order to help me use up more die cuts, because there are so many included in the kit, I reminded myself, like, let's use those little like banner dies and that kind of thing to ground my images, because then I'm using up more die cuts. Whereas if I only used one per card, I'm not really going to get through them. And also it makes a little bit less of an interesting scene because they're just kind of floating in space, or there's not as many things to look at. Next up, I'm using sketch number 12. This is another instance where I am using a mat to die cut out of, and I do the same thing with the pattern paper. In order to make no scraps but use a circle, I cut the circle out of one of the rectangles, and then I cover it with the circle, but the circle that I've cut out is going to be on a cardstock mat, which means that it will be like I won't have to worry about fitting it back in perfectly or cutting it perfectly in the center, because it gives it some wiggle room. And I like this design a lot for having like a really clear focal point, but also a great place for your sentiment, because there's that circle at the top and then that smaller strip of pattern paper there at the bottom. It works out pretty well for that. It does require you to use a pretty large piece of cardstock mat for that main panel, but that's also works out well if you have a particular pattern that's like a little bit bigger of a scale and you don't want to cut it teeny tiny. So in addition to having the Christmas tree, there's also a Santa included with the kit and the Noel. And I was talking about this before and I got totally distracted. There's that mirrored cardstock, which is that gold kind of foil looking cardstock. I love that that's included in the kit. It was just so perfect for the tree. It makes for really gorgeous sentiments. Like when you cut the really detailed Spellbinders sentiments out of it, it looks like almost like a metal embellishment. So I'm so happy when they include those, and it makes me feel like I really need to just like pick up a pack. They were like out of stock the last time I went to pick up a pack, but those are some of my favorite things to use in the kit just because it adds so much oomph to like a die cut. I'm using the Santa. I decided to cut Santa's face out of a brown piece of cardstock because I wanted to add a bit of diversity to my stamps. Or my die cuts in this instance. As I probably mentioned, or those who watch my channel know, I like to donate a lot of my cards. And so I just try to make more of an effort to make them representative of all kinds of people out there, because my cards are being sent to all kinds of people. And so if you want more information on donating your cards, there's always a link in the video description. I share places on my website where you can donate cards and also where you can find jokes to include inside of your cards. So if you like, it'd be nice to send cards, but I don't know what to say, then you can add these jokes inside of your cards instead. And the Santa pieces here, what is awesome and is often something that Spellbinders does is it groups, they group your pieces that need to be cut out of the same color. So like the red hat, the red mouth, the red nose are all on the same die. So you can just run them through the machine together. and not have to like fiddle with teeny tiny, like, I mean, you can see those eyebrows are so small, or the little mouth, and to not have to have individual dies for that are easy to lose or harder to like get through the die cut machine. I really love that attention to detail that is part of Spellbinders. And that is why I think they're like, I mean, they're one of the companies that's been in our industry for so long. They recently celebrated their 10th anniversary, and it's just like the things like that are just, love them about them. The Noel here is a little bit hard to read, unfortunately, but it looks so good on that red pattern paper that I just went with it. Okay, so here's another instance. Again, I'm going to like try to make the most of my cardstock. I don't always do this, but especially when I'm mass producing like this and I can kind of like put a bit of a thought into it, I'm like, I know I need red cardstock for those Santa hats, nose, mouth. Well, I already picked some red for another part of this project. When I'm making like a single card or like a set of 2 or 3 cards, it's a little bit harder to make this much like planning ahead. But I just want to share these little things with you because those of you who really do need to make the most of your supplies, these things will be quite helpful. I'm working with sketch number 21, another one with lots of teeny tiny pieces. However, I think the smaller pieces can be great for using up scraps, but also it definitely takes more time to put together sketch number 21 versus sketch number 2. Sketch number 2 is like 2 rectangles, glue them on, ready to go, so easy. And then, this one you have to cut the 4 little rectangles, and then you have to cut the slightly bigger rectangle with the oval out of it. But it's a really dynamic, interesting looking card. And, sorry, I just like totally lost my train of thought. It's a really dynamic and interesting looking card, but it takes more time. And so you have to decide if that's worth it. Also, the oval that is left over is kind of a small focal point, which is not necessarily a bad thing because it does mean you could just put like a sentiment and be done with a card, which is kind of a fun thing to, like, if you're going to put all this time into the little pattern paper pieces, that is your interest. Then you put your sentiment and go. But if you're somebody who likes like really large images, or you want to add a bunch of stuff, there's not really a lot of room. I did kind of make it work with these gingerbread guys though, because there was this die cut tag that said excited for Christmas. It may have been part of the add-on sentiment pack that I mentioned before, but when I saw it, it just made me think of these gingerbread men that are die cuts, but are also stamps. So if you use up all of your gingerbread men, there's stamps, which is pretty cool too. And I was able to cover the ends of the tag, and I think they went really well together. But also, I'm the kind of person who, if I have a tag, I want to put a string in the hole. Like, I don't like just leaving it there. And that can take a lot of time. So when I was able to basically make the tag just look like a strip instead by strategically covering it with the gingerbread men, that made me so excited because I was like, I've already spent so much time assembling all these little pieces of this card. I really need something that's going to speed things up again. And so being able to like skip that step, but still use that sentiment that I really wanted to, made me happy. It's the little things, guys, the little things sometimes. And then the other one, I picked some other die cuts from the kit. So as I said, jam-packed card kit. These are just 20 cards that you could make with this card kit. If you found this video helpful, here is another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafty time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.